Hey guys, Kenna here. So we've been talking about agroecology and food miles and meat production and looking at food labels, the hunger gap. Today I want to talk a little bit about what happens to our wasted food. Just how much waste is there, what happens to it, and then what can we do about it? Let's look at our essential questions. So number one, what is food waste and just how much is there? Number two, what is the difference in production of food waste in developed versus underdeveloped countries? Number three, what happens to non-standard fruits and vegetables? Number four, what is the debate over the sell-by date? And what is composting? So let's jump right in looking at just how much food waste there is. So here we've got a graph showing you the waste by food group, and this is for the US, and it's in billions of pounds, and the numbers come from 2010. So you can see the single biggest slice of the pie here is dairy products, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and the sell-by date that's printed on them a little later on in the notes today. But you can see that's pretty high there for vegetables. You can also see pretty high numbers there for fruits, grain products, added sugar and sweeteners, meat, poultry, and fish. The lowest section is actually nuts. They hold really, really well. And so usually we don't have to go ahead and throw those out. Eggs do pretty well too. We do have some food waste if they fall, crack, that type of thing. But when we start looking at food waste, I want to remind you about nutrient cycling and the three key nutrients that we've talked about: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, when you start looking at switching from one thing to another in terms of crop rotations, or if you start looking at trying to cycle phosphorus, for example, in a soil, we talk a lot about things like composting. Um, we need nutrient rich materials in order to be able to go ahead and grow our plants. And so it requires these old plants or other food things that we don't consume to decompose back into the ground to replenish those nutrient rich materials into the soil with the help of bacteria, worms, etc. Okay? So that nutrient rich soil then is going to go ahead and fertilize the plants, which will then produce more food for us in return. If they don't stay in this cycle, they end up in a landfill. And it turns out that if you go to a landfill, food represents the single largest component, 21%, of solid waste in landfills and incinerators. And in my mind, most of this is not necessary to even put in a landfill. It can actually be put into composting or something like this to go ahead and be utilized in our production systems. So, what can we do to try and recover some of this food so it doesn't end up in a landfill, but instead gets utilized? What can we do with some of this food that gets just thrown out that's perfectly good food? I mean, I always think it's kind of crazy if I ever go out to eat, which isn't a lot, but when I do, and I see people throwing out perfectly good food instead of taking it home in like a little doggy bag. Okay. So, what can we do? Number one, the most preferred thing is to reduce how much food we produce. I know that seems counterintuitive, but if we start moving food where it needs to go and not make as much, there isn't as much waste. Any food that isn't being consumed gets put to people who are hungry. Then it's getting used, it's not being wasted. If not people, then maybe animals or other industrial uses. We can make things like vinegars, or we can go ahead and produce different products using those foods. Ultimately, I think composting is a great way to use anything that you don't consume. The last, least preferred option should be going ahead and putting it into the trash for incineration or the landfill. So, where does most of this waste take place? And why is it so high? Because we actually have higher numbers in the United States than we do in many other countries. So why are we wasting it? Well, wasted food can occur along the entire supply chain, at the farm, at the processor, at the distributors, wholesalers, retailers, restaurants, food service establishments, and then the end consumer as well. And it occurs every place and all in between each one of these spots. If we can sit down and identify where wasted food occurs along our supply chain, it's possible, and not only possible, but necessary to develop effective strategies to increase the efficiency in these systems. In developing countries, most of the food waste occurs prior to it ever getting to market. It spoils during transportation. And this is due to inefficient processes and equipment in harvesting, transporting, and storing the food. However, in developing countries like the United States, most wasted food is accumulated after it reaches the market, so at the retailer and at the consumer level. And there's a wide variety of reasons why waste happens in the later half of the food supply chain in developed countries, and one example will be highlighted in the following section. One thing is, for marketing reasons, we tend to kind of just throw out things that don't look typical or normal. And so there was a big move to fight against waste. The large Intermarché supermarkets, this is the third largest supermarket chain in France, decided to sell at a 30% cheaper rate the non-calibrated and imperfect fruits and vegetables, what they called the Inglorious fruits and vegetables. And I have a little video for you here to go and watch.
Fruits and vegetables are facing an absurd situation. On one hand, people are encouraged to eat at least 5 a day, a lot of money for families. On the other, we throw 300 million tons of it away each year.
Tout ce qui rentre pas dans la norme, c'est poubelle.
As the European Union made 2014 the European Year Against Food Waste, Intermarché, the third largest supermarket chain in France, decided to rehabilitate the non-calibrated and unperfect fruits and vegetables. So we launched Les Fruits et Légumes Marche, the Inglorious fruits and vegetables, starring the grotesque apple, the ridiculous potato, the hideous orange, the failed lemon, the disfigured eggplant, the ugly carrot, and the unfortunate clementine. Now, you can eat 5 Inglorious fruits and vegetables a day. As good, but 30% cheaper. How did we do it? We bought from our growers the products they usually throw away and sold them in stores. They got their own aisle, their own labelings, and their own spot on the sales receipt. For people to realize that they were just as good as the others, we designed and distributed Inglorious vegetable soups and Inglorious fruit juices. And it worked. Our new kind of fruits and vegetables were an immediate success. We faced only one problem: being sold out. 1.2 tons average sale per store during the first 2 days, plus 24% overall store traffic. This initiative increased awareness about food waste.
Mais c'est très bien ce que vous faites. C'est très bien, il y a assez de gâchis comme ça.
It created a lot of conversation in social networks. Over 13 million people reached after 1 month, and had a big impact in the media. Finally, journalists suggested that every supermarket in the country should do that.
Et moi, je milite pour que ça continue, que ça soit dans tous les supermarchés.
Bonne idée.
The Inglorious fruits and vegetables, a glorious fight against food waste.
So I think it's pretty cool, right? Don't make it waste, make it some taste, right? So Intermarché launched this massive global campaign to rehabilitate and glorify these Inglorious fruits and vegetables with print, billboards, TV, radio, PR, and their catalogs and social media platforms. The initiative was a huge success because it's a win-win-win campaign. Consumers get the same quality products for cheaper. The grower gets money for products that were typically thrown away, and Intermarché increases its businesses by selling a brand new line of products. The following figures are here to help prove it. 21 million people were reached by the campaign after just 1 month. 300% increase of mentions of Intermarché on social networks during the first week. The first most shared article in the history of LSN, which is a professional French retail magazine. 1.2 tons average sale per store during the first 2 days. increase in store traffic by 24%, and 5 of our main competitors launched a similar offer. So the stores were rebranded Inglorious from floor to ceiling, and finally people just realized that they were just as good as the others and started consuming them at a cheaper cost. Okay. So it's cool. And I wish I could use an American example here, but we don't really have one. This video here is from the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, FLPC, and Racing Horse Productions, produced Expired as a collaborative effort between the two programs at Harvard Law School, one that aims to test and teach media advocacy techniques in the context of real-world practices, and one that aims to provide hands-on opportunities for students to learn about and improve the laws and policies shaping the food system. So what happened here is that students were involved in this project, and they enrolled at the clinic and worked on this film as a media advocacy component of their policy research. They were educating consumers and policymakers, and they were pushing for policy changes to reduce waste of healthy, wholesome foods in the United States. In the spring of 2015, they traveled to Missoula, Montana to understand the impact of their highly restrictive date labeling law for milk. This law has been in effect since 1980 and requires all milk to bear a sell-by label date that's dated 12 days from the date of pasteurization, and mandates that such milk be removed from shelves once the date arrives. As a result, countless gallons of milk on grocery shelves get needlessly discarded. Out-of-state dairies have difficulty selling their products in grocery stores in Montana, and consumers suffer because the milk in Montana costs about 40% more than the national average. So let's go ahead and take a watch.
Each year in the US, we waste billions of pounds of good food. And much of this loss could be prevented if we reformed our flawed expiration date system. Because what do these dates actually mean anyway?
A sell-by date is, I would interpret it as being that's the time that you have to be done drinking it.
I'm actually just aware that I have no idea what the date even means.
That date means the expiration date. So I go to the back of the line of milk and try to get the newest date.
No, I kind of give it the smell test.
Turns out there's good reason to be confused. There's no federal law on expiration dates, so states have a dizzying variety of date label laws that aren't based in science or sound public policy. So a team of faculty and students interested in the laws regulating our food decided to investigate. We wanted to tell a small story to illustrate a larger problem with our expiration date system.
The practices around dating of foods are just a complete mess. And anything that we can do to help consumers understand what dates mean and to use dates in a sensible way, I think that's a good thing. Milk is pasteurized, which means that it should not contain pathogenic bacteria like Salmonella or E. coli. So the risks from drinking spoiled milk are virtually zero.
Sorry.
Tastes okay, maybe on the edge of spoiling, but it tastes okay today at least.
Tastes fine.
Most of us thought that milk, well past its expiration date, tasted fine.
This one smells a little weird.
And we learned that spoiled milk, though it's totally gross,
Oh, definitely not good. Well,
won't make you sick.
definitely not good. Would not drink that one. Can I have some water?
Most states let the processor put the date on it, but regardless of how good it is, there's nothing on a jug that'll tell you how good the milk is.
Even though the date on milk isn't related to safety, Montana law prohibits it from being sold or donated more than 12 days after pasteurization.
The standard today is 21 to 24 days, and Montana's still living in 1980, and you're throwing it down the drain when it probably is good for 21 to 24 days. But the 12-day sell-by date tells a consumer nothing. It's just an arbitrary number somebody came up with no scientific backing whatsoever.
I hate wasting stuff that is not, there's nothing wrong with it. I have customers that You know, they think that the sell-by date is a spoil-by date, and really they should have another week on it. And it's very, very frustrating watching stuff go down the drain that could be going to a needy family. Sell-by date itself, we pour down the drain. We cannot donate it to the food bank, so we don't want anybody getting sick, supposedly.
Well, when it comes to food waste, the expression crying over spilled milk actually does apply. Following a study from Harvard, a film crew was in Missoula today to document how Montana's milk date process leads to a mass amount of waste every year.
We want to take a new angle on the issue. It's a huge problem. It's 160 billion pounds of food wasted every year. So focusing on this one example of this law with milk is a way to demonstrate that perfectly good, safe, wholesome food is being thrown out for no reason except that there's a law with an arbitrary date.
If it lasts 21 days and they're putting 14 or 12 days on it, then just think about the waste and think about what could have gone, you know, where that milk could have gone to help.
I think they certainly should be able to donate it and sell it also. I don't see where there should be a difference there.
Each year, 40% of food produced in the U.S. goes to waste. Our system of senseless and conflicting state laws must go. We need a federal law that standardizes expiration dates across products. It should require labels that are clear to consumers, and it should only allow restrictions that are science-based. It's time to change the way we label our food.
Okay, so milk's a tough one because it's a liquid. I don't understand why they can't extend the labeling, especially in Montana, but with solid waste, there is something that you can go ahead and do, and that's composting. Recycling food and other organic waste into compost provides a range of environmental benefits, including improving soil health, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, recycling nutrients, and mitigating the impact of drought. So there's a lot of benefits here. So what exactly is composting? Well, composting is the natural process of recycling organic matter, such as leaves and food scraps, into a valuable fertilizer that can enrich soil and plants. Anything that grows decomposes eventually. Composting simply speeds up the process by providing an ideal environment for bacteria, fungi, and other decomposing organisms like worms, sow bugs, nematodes to do their work. The resulting decomposed matter, which often ends up looking like fertile garden soil, is called compost. Fondly referred to by farmers as black gold, compost is rich in nutrients and can be used for gardening, horticulture, and agriculture. Organic discards can be processed in industrial scale composting facilities or in small scale community composting systems, or even in anaerobic digesters. There's plenty of options. You can have a composting heap in your backyard. And so we're going to talk here, focusing primarily on your home compost, which is a great way for you to keep your organic discards out of the waste stream and to produce valuable soil amendments for your own garden use. So what are the benefits of composting? Well, one should be pretty obvious. It reduces the waste stream, so you make less waste. It cuts the methane emissions from landfills. It improves soil health and lessens erosion, and it conserves water while reducing personal food waste. So let's look at reduction of the waste stream. Composting is such a good way to recycle organic waste that we generate at home. Your food scraps and garden waste can be combined up to more than 28% of what we throw away. Okay, you remember that number from earlier? I think it said 21% of the dump garbage is food. It doesn't need to be. Now, not only is food waste a significant burden on the environment, but processing it is still costly. I mean, think about your garbage man coming to take it and haul it and dump it, and it doesn't break down well in a dump. The average cost to landfill municipal solid waste in the United States is about $55 per ton. That's as of 2019. And with the US generating more than 267 million tons of waste in 2017 and sending 2/3 of that to landfills and incinerators, we spend billions and billions of dollars on waste management. Composting at home can help you divert some of that waste from landfills into something you can use for your yard. when we start looking at cutting methane emissions. Typically, when organic matter decomposes, it undergoes what's called aerobic decomposition, meaning that it's broken down by microorganisms and that requires oxygen. But when compost waste goes into a landfill, it gets buried under massive amounts of other trash. And so oxygen doesn't get to it. And without oxygen, the waste ends up going through what's known as anaerobic decomposition. And without the oxygen, you end up producing this byproduct known as biogas. And roughly 50% methane and 50% carbon dioxide, both of which are greenhouse gases. And methane is 28 to 36 times more effective than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. So you're directly linking this to climate change. And although most modern landfills have methane capture systems, they don't capture all of it. Landfills are the third largest source of human-generated methane emissions in the US. And this because our solid waste infrastructure was designed around landfills. And only about 6% of food waste actually gets composted. But states, cities, and even businesses and vendors are starting to spearhead ways against this. We have the Love Food Not Waste program that we're part of here at Willamette. And so there are things you can do. And there have been many success stories around composting. A notable one being San Francisco. In '96, San Francisco established a huge composting program. And by the year 2000, it was able to divert 50% of its waste from landfills. Wow. I mean, think about that. 50% of its waste, instead of going into the landfill, gets composted. And by increasing its goals over the years, San Francisco has been able to divert almost 80% of its waste from landfill since 2012. That means more than 90,000 metric tons of carbon emissions have been avoided. That's incredible. And while you're doing this, you're improving soil health and lessening erosion, because compost is an essential tool for improving large-scale agricultural systems. Compost contains those three primary nutrients we talked about: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, as well as little trace elements like calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc. And instead of relying on synthetic fertilizers that contain chemicals, what about this organic alternative? Research has shown that the capability of compost to increase the soil's water retention is great. It makes the soil more resilient, one of our key pillars of agroecology. So that leads right into conserving water. It turns out agriculture is one of the biggest users of water in the US, counts for about 80% of our water use. Irrigation systems are effective, but are expensive and time consuming. Additionally, water is becoming increasingly harder to obtain. And research has shown that water retaining capacities of soil increase the addition of organic matter, and 1% increase in the soil organic matter helps to hold about 20,000 gallons more water per acre. Less water needed, higher yields, healthier soils. So it starts with you, reducing your personal food waste. Consumers are responsible for a staggering amount of wasted food. The average American family of 4 people throws out about $150 worth of food every month. That's a 50% increase since 1970. And research in 3 US cities indicates that the category of edible food most wasted by households was fruits and vegetables. Okay. US retailers and consumers throw away about 60 million tons or $160 billion worth of produce annually. And the best way to reduce this is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Okay. So what kind of composting can you do? Well, most of us are going to be doing some form of backyard composting. You take your food scraps from the kitchen, dump them out back. There are really 2 main types: cold, or what's known as passive composting. It ends up being a little bit more anaerobic. If you turn it and stuff, you can get some out of it. But the best way to do it is what's known as hot or active composting, because these slower, colder piles tend to smell a little bit more. They tend to be wetter. And they take a lot longer to go ahead and turn over into usable organic fertilizer. Okay, and you can do it indoors as well. It's just most people don't because of the smell. So exactly what goes in depends a little bit on where you live, how much waste you produce, whether it's kitchen or yard waste or both. There are two main types that we're going to go ahead and talk about. As I mentioned, cold breaks down organic matter slowly, but it also takes very little effort and very little maintenance. Mine is somewhere in between in the backyard. Sometimes I forget about it and it just kind of sits there and goes into kind of a cold mode. But then as we get into summer, I'll add water and stir it up and go ahead and get it much hotter along with the warmer temperatures, and it helps to decompose more quickly. Okay. It's the best process if you have very little organic waste to compost and not a whole lot of time to tend to it. But the more into composting you get, you probably should go ahead and switch over to hot composting, because hot composting is good not only for making our product faster, but also the temperature tends to get hot enough so that you can actually kill off pathogens and harmful bacteria, fungi, worms, these types of things, and even weeds, so your seeds don't go ahead and germinate. So hot is just better because it's faster, more managed, but it takes more effort. Okay, so something to kind of keep in mind as you go ahead and take a look at this. So what do you kind of composting? Well, organisms that decompose organic waste need 4 key elements to survive or thrive: nitrogen, carbon, air, and water. And since all compostable materials contain carbon, varying amounts of nitrogen, composting success is typically a matter of finding right balance. Okay? How much carbon to nitrogen ratio for your particular need and use depends on the plants you're going to use it for and stuff too. But typically your greens are going to go ahead and give you more nitrogen. Your browns are really going to be there for carbon, and then you've got to supply it with oxygen and water. So I hope that you guys will take a look at this and think about what you can do in terms of not wasting. And if we do have leftovers that we're not going to consume, maybe trying to set up some sort of composting system. Here in Lane County, you can now go ahead and put your food scraps, your food waste, in with your yard waste, and they will go ahead and compost it for you. Okay? So remember, greens for nitrogen. Nitrogen is one of the basic building blocks of life. It's essential for growth and reproduction in plants and animals. And a higher nitrogen to carbon ratio is most commonly found in fresh organic material. Okay? Having plenty of greens in your compost pile, make sure that decomposers can grow and reproduce quickly. More of those means more of us getting this nice compost. So grass clippings are a great example. Throw those in there. Coffee grounds. Careful, we can change the pH too much if we have too many coffee grounds, and food scraps. For your carbon addition, let's think about your browns, dead leaves, branches, twigs. Yeah, you can even put in paper. Don't do anything glossy or colored, but you can go ahead and do just typical paper. The brown paper that they have for like children's tablets and stuff is great. But to achieve the best carbon to nitrogen ratio for your compost, the best kind of rule of thumb is 2 to 4 parts of brown material for every 1 part of green. And then finally, like any other living organism, you need water, you need oxygen. And the more you turn your compost, the more oxygen you're getting into it, so we can do more of this aerobically. And more aerobically, then we're going to go ahead and get faster turnover, less biogas as a side product, and you'll get your compost more quickly. So you want to keep it moist, but not wet. Think about like a wrung out sponge. You don't want it to actually have standing water. You may put standing water on top, but make sure you mix it through with a shovel, or if you have one of those bins, you can go and spin it or rotate it, that sort of thing. But if it gets too dry, that won't be very effective in terms of decomposing either. All right, guys, that's what I've got for you today. Stay healthy, stay safe, and don't forget to get out there and start composting and avoid as much waste as you can. All right, take care of yourselves. I'll see you on the other side. So long.